Just send me a message. She's unauthorized to log in data tracker. Yeah. Yes, I'm on WhatsApp with him. He's got a different browser. Won't let me in. I already went to the guy over there. Who's in touch with IETF. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very first session of the RPP, the RESTful Provisioning Protocol Working Group. My name is Marco Davids. I'll be your co-chair for today. It's my first time, so bear with me, but luckily there's a very experienced person sitting next to me, Andy. Most of you know him already. My other co-chair was supposed to be working remote from the UK, but he has some issues in getting into the data tracker, so he's working on that, but we'll start without him, unfortunately. So Kevin, my co-chair, was supposed to do this part, but I'll do it anyway. Very familiar slides to all of you, the note well. It's important to remember that your contributions to the IETF, the note well applies to that. So please, if you haven't done so already, and I noticed there are some new people here in this room. They are a guest of Dan, so please read them carefully. There is another really note well, also very important. The IETF strives to be an inclusive community where everyone is being respectfully treated. We not only send, but we also listen to each other. Even if we're not native speakers, we're supposed to treat each other respectfully. And that is all in this code of conduct, and here's the note well about that. So please take also note of that if you will. Then some meeting tips. I'll skip them for now. Oh, maybe not. These are important. If you sign into a session with Data Tracker, please scan the QR code. It was on the screen prior to this session, but it is also on the microphone stands. If you haven't scanned it yet, it's a digital alternative of the old-fashioned blue sheets, so it's important for us to count who is in this room later on, but it is also important if you want to participate in the mic queue, because if you scan the QR code, you will connect it through Data Tracker to this session, and you have to put yourself in a mic queue even if you are in this room. And it also allows you to participate in the show of hands. If you're not speaking, please turn off your microphone and video. That also applies to remote participants, and also a headset is strongly recommended. Here are some URLs, but you probably won't need them because you're in the session already. And here's the agenda for today. We're now at the administrivia part. So this is the agenda bashing part. And This is also the moment where I would look into the room and to see if there are any note takers. And I'm specifically looking into that direction. No?
You're going to do it, Rick? Okay.
Rick did an outstanding job last time, so I don't want to put any pressure. There is somebody else who can help already. But since he did such a marvelous job, I was looking in his direction. Sorry for that. So we have a note taker. I guided you through the note well, and we're now at the agenda. First, I would like to ask Ori, after the agenda is done, to say a few words, since this is the very first RPP working group session. I thought it would be appropriate if he could give some inspiration and speak some inspirational words. Not yet, Ori. Then we move over to the working group operation part, the section of this agenda. I'll be talking briefly about the tools and working group process that we envisioned. And with we, I mean the co-chairs, Gavin and I. And Gavin was supposed to speak about deliverables and milestones, so that is going to be challenging indeed, because I can do this part, but not really that part of the presentation that was supposed to be done by him. Then we move over to the update section. Martin will speak about what he and a few others did during the weekend at the hackathon. Then Pavel will talk about a center survey. Hopefully we have James Gold in the session, because he will give some feedback, an update of the progress that the Tiger team has made. We have some time reserved for clarification questions. And then we move over to the next section of the agenda, which is the requirements part. Martin did a lot of work prior to this meeting, and he will be presenting on that. And also Pavel did a lot of work with the architecture part that we envision, and he will present that as well. And then when time permits, Martin would like to say something, a few words only, about the draft that he published, well, I think it was yesterday. And then Pavel will spend a little bit more time, when time permits, about specific RPP design challenges that he encountered along the way. So that's as far as the agenda is concerned. Is there any input, any feedback, any changes proposed? Maybe I'm looking into the room, online, in the chat perhaps. Nothing. Okay, then Ori, if you'd be so kind to officially kick off the RPP working group meeting.
Hi, Ori Steele. I'm the responsible AD for the RPP working group. Thank you all for helping to get this working group started. I want to thank Marco and Gavin for agreeing to chair the working group. I want to invite you all to engage as much as you can on the list, and also with your chairs to advance these documents and drafts. And if there's ever any concerns, like Marco and Gavin mentioned, our IETF processes, if you have any questions about the process, you can always come to the chairs or myself. We're here to help support all of you, and thank you all for making RPP possible. I look forward to a successful working group. We can accomplish all of our documents and hit all our milestones on time. Thanks.
And thank you for the excellent work you did in getting the charter done, and all the other things and the advice you gave us. That would bring us, let me see, to the next slide, which is my slide. And that is, well, it's a brief overview of the tools and the working group process that we, the co-chairs, propose for this working group. It's nothing spectacular. It's mostly best current practice. Most noteworthy, I would say, is that we created a GitHub organization. The URL is on the slide. This is also not new. There is an increasing number of working groups working this way, and I have heard very good feedback from them, positive feedback. In particular, I spoke to the co-chair of the DNS Up working group, who explained that they are very happy with this way of working, and we basically use them as an inspiration for this GitHub organization. So you can have a look at their GitHub organization to see which way we are heading with our own organization, at least the way I envision it. We chose GitHub There are alternatives as well, of course. You can use GitLab or Bitbucket even if you want, and maybe others. GitHub is pretty straightforward, but most importantly, it has a very large user base. And also, last but not least, the IETF Secretariat actually provides some support for it. And I'll get back to that later. So that is why we opted for GitHub. The advantage of working this way through a Git kind of system is it improves traceability in our view, and also transparency. Whenever changes are done, it's visible to everyone, and we prefer that, we appreciate that. The way it is set up is the ADs and the chairs are owners of the organization. So continuity is also guaranteed. If something happens to me or whatever, there are plenty of other people who have full access to the GitHub organization. And also the IETF Secretariat has ownership. So that's nice because they have some support for using this way of working. For example, IETF makes backups of the GitHub repository. So in case of a worst case scenario where the GitHub would become unavailable, we would still have all the work in an archive maintained by the IETF Secretariat. Gavin and I used this GitHub organization for preparing this meeting. So if you go to the URL, you will see all that. But of course, we propose to use it for more than just that. We propose to use it to do the actual work as well. So when drafts reach a certain maturity, maybe when they become a candidate for working group adoption, we propose to move them into the GitHub organization as a repository with the editors or the authors as team members with read-write access. And then other collaborators can perhaps send in pull requests. So then we have everything nice in one place. And the advantage for that, one advantage anyway, is that we have everything in one central place. So whenever somebody visits the GitHub organization, it is immediately clear to them that what they find there is work of this working group, instead of authors maintaining drafts in their own personal repository, for example. And another advantage is IETF, like I said, has some tooling. There is also some tooling that they provide that will send weekly digest updates to the mailing list, and we intend to use that as well. Of course, GitHub offers a few other possibilities. There is, for example, a discussion section at GitHub, and I noticed that actually some other working groups make use of that, like the HTTP API working group. But for now, we would like to propose to keep the discussions on the mailing list and not make use of the discussion facilities of GitHub. And also the other facilities we will not use, except for the issues, of course, a very powerful feature of GitHub. So when drafts will end up as a repository in GitHub, we propose that we make use of the issue facilities and also label them. And if you want to see what we mean, again, you can have a look at the DNSOP GitHub organization. There is also an IETF wiki. We have set up a page. I wasn't really sure how we could put this wiki to use until Maarten enthusiastically started working on his requirements early design phase, I would say. And I think that is an appropriate use of wiki, but we are open to suggestions for other uses of the wiki. I do feel it has an advantage of working on early phases of for example, requirements, but there's also a disadvantage because the wiki is fluid and volatile, and everyone with a data tracker account basically has access to it and can modify it. So I don't think that this is a good place to keep work on a longer term. So for example, the requirement work that Maarten is doing, I envision that at some point in time, it'll still move to the GitHub as a repository. And that's it. The other things are basically no-brainers. We have, of course, the mailing list. I already mentioned we propose to use that for everything, particularly discussions, but also for the weekly digest updates from the GitHub. And Gavin and I, and that is only there for the sake of completeness, Gavin and I maintain a restricted Google Drive where we work on slides. This slide was created there, for example. And that's it. It's just a proposal. If you have any feedback, you can do it now briefly or give it on the mailing list. We'd be more than happy to make improvements or change things if need be. That's it as far as I'm concerned. And do we have Powell in the queue. Powell?
Yes, Paul, colleague Danik. So I want to put two things under consideration. So you mentioned that discussions over GitHub are not wished, or the feature of discussions, but I think we had pretty good experience when working on the charter by having a connection between GitHub issues, comments, and the mailing list. So basically the participants could do both, comment on GitHub and comment on the mailing list, and it was kind of synchronizing both sides, and I think it was pretty good experience. So basically no comments were lost, and actually there was no platform disconnection.
Did you do the discussion in the issue part or really in the discussion part of GitHub?
So we haven't used discussion part. I'm pretty sure that it would work. It would have to be tested, but in the issue part it worked pretty well. So,
yes,
so
of
basically,
course.
and in the pull request. So basically, no matter if someone would start the conversation on GitHub or over the mailing list, actually it was working both ways, which was quite a interesting, nice experience. I would put it under consideration to try it out, because I think this kind of kept both types of users, let's say mailing list only users and GitHub users, pretty much content.
Yeah, so yeah, point taken.
And on the wiki, I share your concern about wiki being kind of fluid. We discussed it with Martin, because by working on the draft, I actually wanted to put a reference to some stable requirements, and this possible. There's a GitHub backend behind the wiki, so at least you can refer to some stable state of wiki at some point if you wish. And so there's one fact.
That is true. That's reassuring.
Yeah.
Okay. Scott Hollenbeck, is he in the room or is he remote? Scott, you're on.
Thanks, Marco. I actually found it somewhat difficult to follow the charter discussion when GitHub was used so extensively. I saw quite a few commits and merges and things like that completely absent of context. Anyway, I'm a very strong proponent of using the mailing list for discussions. And as I noted in chat, according to RFC 8874, work done in GitHub has no special status. So if the working group does decide to use GitHub extensively, I'd very strongly urge the chairs to take a good look at that RFC and make sure that they completely understand the requirements to use GitHub the way it's described there. Thank you.
You mean the RFCs mentioned on this slide, right?
Correct.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that, but we try to be compliant with those RFCs, and that's a good point. We will read them again and make sure your point is noted. Thank you. Then we run into a challenge because we don't have. Oh, we do have Gavin in the session. So, Gavin, are you there? We don't hear you. Nope. No, it shouldn't be his chair. Kevin, can you unmute your mic?
You want to speak to him?
Or we go on to the next section.
Sure.
Yeah. Kevin, if you can hear me, we move on to the next part and then get back to you once you are audible. The next presentation is from Maarten, who will give us some feedback about the hackathon of last weekend. Yep, should work now.
So, hello everyone. As mentioned, last weekend we had a hackathon over 2 days, experimenting with all kinds of new technology, at least new for us, at least for me, and playing around, seeing what works, what doesn't work, and sharing ideas. And for the hackathon, we didn't have any strictly defined goals, but 2 of the goals that are more or less like floated up to the top were learning, as in learning how can you develop an API, what are current best practices, standards for developing APIs, and also what are the tools used to develop APIs, generate APIs, and just get some hands-on practical experience. And doing that getting knowledge, experience will help us in our work when we are going to design a RPP API and all the things surrounding RPP. So, because having played around with it, created prototypes, testing stuff, will make you understand how things work and how things can not work. And we had a lot of discussion as well, mainly about deployment scenarios. So how could you deploy RPP in any future scenario? And also potentially new use cases for RPP, such as alternatives for the current authorization token we use for transfers, which is not very secure. Are there other options that an RPP API might be able to offer to support a more secure transfer mechanism? This is an example of a very basic example of a deployment option where you are running RPP in parallel with the existing EPP deployment. Another one would be a serial deployment where you have an EPP installation or deployment, and you put a RPP proxy in front of it, and then a client can connect to the RPP proxy, which will then forward request to EPP, or the client can directly connect to EPP. Another option would be to reverse that, where you have an EPP proxy in front of RPP, where a client can connect to EPP, which will then proxy to RPP. So depending on your situation, your challenges, your wishes as a registry, you might choose for one or the other, or may even come up with other alternative scenarios. So during the hackathon, we decided on working on a project where we would use the serial deployment version, where we would have an RPP server as a proxy for EPP. So the client would connect to RPP with and send JSON messages over a RESTful API, and then the RPP server would translate that to EPP requests and send it to an EPP server. This work might actually be useful later on as well, not just for purposes of the hackathon and learning about how things work, but something like this can be used later, for instance, for testing RPP in real-world scenarios. You can use it, well, when we have a little bit more improved version. Right now it's pretty bare bones, it doesn't support everything. But when we have a better version, you can use it to maybe test your connectivity between your own EPP servers and this RPP proxy server. And also, it could also function as a RPP reference implementation for keeping up with current RPP standard, so that we always have running code reflecting the latest specification. So the results of this weekend is that we have working code for RPP that uses the login and the domain create functionality, and this is working end to end. So client can connect to RPP and all the way to the EPP server and back. Our messages being transmitted over JSON messages and XML messages. JSON for RPP and XML for EPP. We created an EPP server implementation, which is basically kind of a lightweight basic implementation. Doesn't support a lot. At the moment, it only supports login and domain create, but it can receive EPP messages, parse them, build a model, and send responses back, and it validates the EPP messages as well. We also created a new specification for the API, which is based on type spec. This is something that Daryl Miller started during the hackathon, I think in Vancouver, which is a very nice specification language for APIs. Type spec allows you to specify your API endpoints, but also your data model that you want to use. And then you can use the type spec compiler to compile that into an open API specification and also a JSON schema document. So we use the open API specification to generate an RPP server stub, which then served as the RPP proxy to EPP or as a forwarder. And we also created a very basic client to connect to the RPP server. So all in all, it was a lot of fun developing this, and we learned a lot. Main thing is that I want to ask the room here if there are more people that are also into trying out new technology and working with APIs, and if they're interested in working with us during the next hackathon in Madrid. So we could maybe continue working on this or maybe work on other stuff.
We have Jim in the queue.
Okay, I'll finish this slide and then we can do questions.
Okay, sorry.
So in future work, as I mentioned, it would be nice to have some kind of running code reflecting the latest state of the specifications, and we can make this available as a sandbox somewhere in the cloud or maybe as a Docker image for download. And you can use that to test RPP against your own EPP servers, for instance. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Jim?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Martin. Jim Reed speaking for myself. You seem to have done a lot of work at the hackathon, very impressive. You mentioned that you've learned a lot, or the participants learned a lot. Has this been written up anywhere, or the only information we have about the hackathon is what you presented on these slides? If you've learned a lot during the hackathon, I think it'd be good to have that written up and documented somewhere. And if so, where is it documented?
Very good observation. Yeah. So we didn't think about writing down the actual lessons learned, which is something that I might actually do this week, and then maybe put it on a wiki or somewhere else. But yeah, thank you for. I'll look in if I can talk to the people that were there and come up with a list of the things that were most important.
That would be great, Martin. Thanks. I have a horrible feeling when people do stuff or useful stuff at the hackathon, it then gets forgotten about by the time the next IETF meeting comes along, because not everyone has the same recollection about what was done and what were the findings from the previous ones. So I think it's good to capture this information while it's still fresh in everyone's memory. Thanks.
Thank you.
Powell, can you make it quick?
Yes, so Jim, if the time allows today, some of the slides I produced during the discussions actually of our findings. So this is why we added to the agenda. If the time's allowed, we'll cover it today, but if not, maybe I will circulate to the mailing list or somehow.
Thank you. Next presentation, let me see. There would be the sentence survey from Powell. Oh.
right. Okay, so I will cover here some analysis that we started to do for EPP, actually, to figure out what kind of extensions we need and what kind of extensibility, what kind of functionality would be expected. And actually, it was based on still preliminary charter back then, which was more explicit about this task. So we formed such tiger team. So I think Jim Good will cover about more work that was done in this area. But one of the tasks that I took care of was, let's say, surveying the registries about their current usage of EPP or extensions and current needs, just to figure out what we have to transport to RPP and what eventually is missing in EPP, which we'll have to add on top. The final charter doesn't have this point, but we thought that this work is still useful. That's why we'll be presenting it today. So the survey was done in the late 2024. The participation was from mostly from the center. Registry Member Center is the organization of CCTLDs in Europe, but there are also similar organizations in other parts of the world which are kind of peering with centers. So we distributed this survey to also to other registries. We had around 40 responses, mostly from CCTLDs, even though the GTLDs could also participate, and some of the CCTLDs who also run GTLD registry, they also responded in this capacity. So I won't go through all the questions, but only those which are, I think, relevant here. So one was whether people are using the IETF standard EPP or some deviation from it. So like 80% is using, or over 80% is using really a standard one. And the rest is making some own customization, which, let's say, standard one include also the let's say STD69 compliant extensions. Yeah, so private extensions were also in this blue area. There's a list of what people did in this non-standard extension. So this one was kind of interesting for us. So it was like adding new functions, adding new fields, removing, let's say, the required fields or making them optional. This was interesting. The other, let's say, restrictions that people added, or adding new statuses. And going through this list, even in the feedbacks directly, some of the people admitted that it could have been done within EPP framework, but it would be more complicated. So they took the straight way of just going on way. Clicker. Yes. Other question was about who supports which extensions. So there's a long list of on IANA registry of extensions, but actually only these 4 made it over 10% of response bar, which is like 3 responses. 2 of them are pretty obvious hits. So the DNSSEC one, very good adopted, and the RGP extension. There is also launch phase and registry fee, pretty much good used. But on this end, I think it may be that is underrepresented on this part, because the launch phase, it only affects the registries who are launching, which is for CCTLDs rather rarely the case, and the registry fee is also more likely for GTLD space than CCTLD. So this may be some bias in this area. So this was another question about the registry-specific EPP extensions. So people are, a lot of people are defining own extensions, and you can see. And what is interesting about this list, that it kind of overlaps with the other list. So people are using also standard extension to do the same stuff. So adding fields, and actually some of the fields repeat very often. So things like language, VIT ID, or natural person flag, or the differentiation between natural person and organization. These were repeating with many answers. So people are basically independently doing the same stuff, but by extending the EPP privately. Yeah, the EID was also mentioned here. I think this was also flying into the requirements, so I think Martin will cover for this. And here is interesting also that people mentioned that they implement RFC, but not completely, just a part of it. There's a, let's say, dense slide, but it is very interesting because it actually tells what people are missing in EPP and what would expect from other protocol to cover. So I tried to group them in 3 blocks. So one is the repeating a lot is listing, search, history, bulk functionality. So basically acquiring the list of domains under management, searching through them, or the really bulk updates or all of these alikes, which I'm probably it's possible in EPP, but nobody was brave enough to do it. Then the data model, I think this also overlapping with the other stuff. So adding fields is here again, or changing the cardinality of the fields, especially the fields which EPP defines as singular. There are people who want them multiple times. And security was mentioned. So basically, this is also what appeared in the hackathon discussion, the different authorization for transfers and alikes. Yeah, whether people use other protocols. So there was also like 30% people doing different stuff, and what these are. So part of it do already APIs to cover this missing functionality. So like a drop list API can be an example, or to fetch the list under management. And people are still doing SOAP or still doing RRP. So yeah, just to mention that. And whether people consider implementing alternative. 1/3 told yes, and most of the answers are more or less coming in direction doing something with REST, with JSON over HTTP. So I think this I don't have to spend too much time on this. We are working on it, right? And reasons why people want to do it. So some of them are happy with EPP. I'm okay accepting that. And some people say that they are not doing anything else because there is no standard. So I think we are on the right place also covering for this. So from this survey, I draw, to summarize the conclusions. There are 2 extensions which are pretty much very good use. So I think this would be right to include them in the core of the RPP, the DNSSEC and the RGP. We have like 2 runner-ups which you have to take a look whether these are more extensions, more core protocol. Probably we have to hear more from GTD space how it looks. Most common extensions add fields to especially to the contacts. So I think we should take a look at RPP is making this thing, this process easy, and that's making this process, let's say, encouraging people to let's say do the same thing the same way. So if one registry would want to add VIT ID, it will be added once and will be called the same for all of them, rather than everyone doing let's say the private stuff. Some missing extension points, like the other schemas for name server designation. So EPP is only has objects, has attributes, and some people are doing it different ways. Maybe it's also consideration for DELEC in the future. Yeah, the number of missing features were achieved by other means than EPP extensions. Well, yes, thank you. This was it.
Thank you. We have time for 1 or 2 clarification questions, maybe. No? Oh, sorry. Yeah? James?
Hi, Powell. James Calvin speaking for myself. Could you go back to slide 9?
Now I know why the numbers are there. Yes.
Could you just say a little more about what the last 2 bullets really are on that page? What's really going on there?
So actually this citing the answers from the participants, but what I can make up out of this. So the multiple logins user roles per registrar would be expectation of, probably it's not a limitation of EVP, but a practice in the industry that there is one credential which can do everything with registrar account, read, write, everything, and people expect to have more granularity, to have read-only accounts or some limited scope accounts. Likely there's not inherent to EVP that is missing, it's just that people just perceive it like this, yeah.
Okay, I guess in my mind, the distinction I'm drawing is they're looking for that in the base EPP as opposed to the client on top of it, the application that uses EPP underneath it. I mean, if you don't know, that's fine. I just find that a little odd in EPP, quite honestly. But I was just curious. Thanks.
Thank you. Jim?
Yeah, I reviewed the report and I found it very interesting. And I see this as an opportunity. Hopefully, the GTLEs can look to do a similar survey, maybe in the CPH Tech Ops group. And I see this as an opportunity as well related to the extensions being worked on by regex. So maybe if there are some enhancements that could be made to EPP based on the results of these surveys, it would be useful. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Powell. Up next, we have Maarten, who is going to talk about requirements. Let me see if I have the slides. No, we're not. I'm sorry, I'm wrong in the agenda. Of course, we have Jim first, all right? Who's going to report back on the Tiger team. Sorry, Jim.
Yeah, I was wondering there. I was like, hey,
yeah,
I thought it was.
I'm so sorry. I'm trying to multitask.
Okay, yeah, yeah, I don't see the deck yet. Okay,
No,
great. Thank you very much. I see it now. Yeah, I'm Jim Gould from VeriSign, and I'm going to be providing an update on the Tiger team's work on EPP extensibility and extension analysis. Am I able to do the next slide? Let me see here.
Yeah, you should be.
Oh, look at that. Oh. Yeah, the work that we were doing was done on a Google Doc. I have the URL there. And I encourage anybody else that is interested in doing this analysis to participate. The goal of the Tiger team was to look back at the work on EPP extensions over the past 20 plus years, because in creating a new provisioning protocol, it's very important to understand where we have been and what we have done. So really the goal here is to look at these extensions, learn from them, and come up with a concrete set of recommendations for the design and development of RPP. And I included the Tiger team there, and we've met a couple times, and we've been primarily working on the Google Doc, and I'll get to the next steps at the end. Let me, okay. So the first was on forms of extensibility. Where we started was looking at RC 5730 at the forms of extensibility defined in there. The first is the transport mapping extensibility, there where we have TCP and 5734. There are 2 new transports adopted by the regex working group. On the packet protocol, there's the extension framework of the protocol extension, which doesn't leverage the command and response elements. Like, for example, the client and server transaction IDs. I've seen a few instances of that extension type. But primarily it's the object extension and command response extensions that are used in defining new objects, as well as defining new attributes that can be passed in a command or a response. One extension type that was discussed at the last regex meeting was authorization information, which is not, I haven't seen very many examples. Well, I've only seen one example of that, but it is a form. Now, what we did was, in looking at the extensions, we came up with additional specialized forms that extend upon the base ones in EPP. The first is called command type extension, and this is defining a new command. RGP restore is a perfect example of this. Function extension. What this is defining a new function by creating a new object with a single command. Like, for example, if you want to do name suggestion, you would define a suggestion object and just have an info command. There are a few examples of this that have been created. There are poll message extensions as well. The example here is the change poll RFC. And then, honestly, I had added this one here, the key value pair extension. I thought that I had heard that there were many key value pair EPP extensions out there, but there was only one that we found. And I just got to say, I would not recommend going down the key value pair extension route. Then there are operational practice extensions, and an example here is the secure auth info for transfer, as well as the unhandled namespaces. And then the object property, and Paul had brought this one up, and it took a little time for me to understand what this was, but really it's a specialized form of a command response extension that is adding properties to objects. So all the CRUD commands would be able to manage these properties. And then the final one is an enumerated value space extension, and that's adding new values to a enumerated list. Like, for example, adding new statuses in the RGP extension that didn't exist before. And then what we did was we jumped to looking at the extensions. And what we did was we identified 58 EPP extensions. We realized that there's plenty more out there, but what we did was we looked at the EPP extension registry, and then we pulled in additional ones that we were aware of. So the list is currently at 58. What we did was we created a summary table so that you can take a look at all the extensions more easily in table form with a subset of the attributes. And then what we did was we created a section for a deep dive into each of the EPP extensions with a host of attributes. And really, what I found to be very useful was the unique aspects, and considering when reviewing an EPP extension, what aspects of that extension would be applicable to a provisioning protocol like RPP. And then what we did was we came up with a list of recommendations, one of them being embedding a particular extension into RPP, or recommending to create a new extension based on the extension framework built into RPP. And that extension could be done within regex or anywhere else. It doesn't have to be done by the RPP working group. Design was to consider the functionality in the EPP extension while developing RPP to ensure that functionality could be supported. And then the not applicable was really associated with inactive EPP extensions. And here's an example of a summary row for the RGP extension. You can see that we had recommended embed the RGP functionality and statuses into RPP. And we added an additional item in here called enhance. And I'm actually, based on, I guess, the hackathon, I'm a little bit concerned about doing fundamental changes to how the processes work, because otherwise you're going to have a really hard time mapping the protocols or proxying the protocols in a way. And the enhance was meant to like take the two-step process of the restore and make it into one. That's pretty much what that was about. And then this is an attempt to take all of the deep dive for the RGP extension and put it on one slide. So I hope you can see it in the room, but there is a description. You can see the unique aspects in the case of the RGP extension. This is the first extension that added a new command type, in this case, the restore command. And then the recommendations included some additional content to describe the basis for the recommendation. So the next steps are to identify any additional extensions. So if you are aware of any EPP extensions that are not in the list of 58 extensions that we've been looking at, please let us know, get involved. Then to complete the analysis, we got through 54 or 58. Now, those are in, I would call like draft form. So each of us have been taking turns going in and doing the analysis, but we haven't met to really review all that. For the Tiger team, we want to get consensus on the forms of extensibility. So taking all that analysis and then consolidating and identifying the forms of extensibility that would be applicable for RPP, and then come to consensus on our recommendations for those extensions. And then what we would like to do is report back to the RPP working group. It would be great if we could do it at the next IETF and maybe the IETF after that, but that's the goal. So, and that's it.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jane. Are there any questions?
You take a question from
I don't know. Okay. Rick?
Thank you. Rick Wilhelm, PIR. I just wanted to thank Jim and all the members of the Tiger team. As someone who's had their head in EPP for a long time, I don't know that I've seen such a comprehensive document that gets all of the EPP extensions in one pile and so comprehensively assembled. So I think that I'm going to be using this in my day job for EPP, regardless of what we and everybody here within earshot does about RPP. So this is a useful tool regardless. So thanks to everybody, Jim, and everybody that was involved on the Tiger team.
Yeah, I agree. All right, thank you once more. And up to the next presentation, which is, now it is Martin Willing with his requirements exploration. Gavin? Oh yeah, so just for your information, Gavin is in the room and he will be presenting his slide after the architecture session of Powell. So before the time, when time permits part.
Okay. We don't have any requirements defined as yet because we're just starting. And although it is important to have a good set of requirements before starting the actual work of designing an API, we have been experimenting, for example, with the hackathon. But for that, we don't really need a strict list of requirements. But as I said, if we go further, then we definitely need to define a set of requirements. And over the last few meetings and on the mailing list and discussions during meetings and during the hackathon, we have come up with a set of requirements or a potential set of requirements. But as I said, these are definitely not the requirements. And this presentation is more to give an overview of the things that we heard, discussed that were mentioned, just for inspiration and input into the design process. And also, there's also the question on what process are we going to follow when we're talking about designing requirements. Do we want to go full IETF on this and create a document draft for this, or do we want to go a more agile approach? For instance, I started on a wiki, but that probably isn't the best place to continue doing this work. For one of the reasons that I think Marco mentioned is that anybody that has a data tracker account can change whatever they want on any wiki, apparently. So that's, even though it is tracked by GitHub, it might not be the ideal workflow. So we need to come up with some process for developing requirements and writing down requirements. So this is something we need to find out together on what's the best approach for this, and also an approach that would allow us to also easily modify or add requirements when we are already in the design process of an API or a data model, and we come up with other ideas or find out that things might not work the way we thought at the beginning. Then we should be able to go back to the requirements and modify them without having to go to a full IETF document change process. So I would suggest a more agile process for managing the requirements. Well, for right now, as I said, they're on our wiki. There's a link there on the slide for the wiki page, and they're grouped in multiple groups. There's a whole list of the groups. Most of them are pretty obvious, not really big eye openers or grandiose ideas. It's just like common sense things to do when you're designing a new API or protocol. And it's definitely not the complete list. As I said, these are just the things that we thought of until now or were mentioned, but probably a lot of those on the list can be dropped or replaced, or have to be new ones have to be added. So I think I can go through this list, and because there are a lot of different groups, it's probably not a good idea to have a long discussion on each of the requirements because we don't have that much time. But I think we can have one or two questions for each group if you would like to. And I think it's a good idea to do the questions during discussing each group and not at the end, because otherwise we'll all be discussing probably the latest group, and because most of us have forgotten the first couple of groups already. At least I would have. So the first one is about the requirements for the actual API. So these are like the no-brainers. So it should be based on HTTP, using a REST architectural style, stateless, and preferably the specification should be in kind of in a format that's not bound to any specific technology, so such as OpenAPI, which is a standard for documenting APIs, which can then be used to generate clients or generate server stubs for development, but it's not linked to any particular language or framework or whatever. So it's kind of format of API tooling agnostic. That's very nice. And also we experimented with with TypeSpec during the hackathon. And TypeSpec is a language that allows you to generate the OpenAPI specification. So this is something we would like to look into if it's something we could use for the API as a requirement. And also, yeah, we should use all the existing work already present about HTTP and web standards and not try to reinvent something. I don't know if any questions about this.
Anyone?
No? Okay, good.
Oh, we have Jim in the queue.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's additional slides, but I did want to bring up one potential point that was brought up on the mailing list associated with a validation. And in particular, in RDAP, a server, well, I guess in the case it's mainly about the clients, but the server could ignore things that are not understood. And in EPP, I always thought that EPP, the server was expected to validate the input from the client. So therefore you would never get a partial commit. And so that is I guess a key point for RPP to consider related to whether or not the server should ignore or whether or not the server needs to fail a command if there is input that's not understood.
Yeah, that's a good point. The next slide,
It's mixed.
one of the next slide has something about data validation and yeah, whether or not the server should accept partial documents or not. That's something we should further explore. This is the requirements for the data model. So it should be based on preferably based on some data format agnostic data structures, type spec again. And existing EPP extensions that are very commonly used, for instance, the DNSSEC extension, as Pavel had shown in his survey, may be added to the actual core model of RPP. So that shouldn't be then an extension anymore, but just part of the RPP protocol itself. And of course, support for internationalization. Questions on this slide? Nope.
No, nobody in the queue.
Okay, continuing on to data representation. So it would be nice if RPP could support multiple data formats, for instance, JSON, which we think should be the default format used for RPP, but there might also be use cases where you feel that, okay, I don't like JSON for some reason for my registry or other organization, and I'd like to use something else, for instance, YAML, or just keep using XML, then that should also be possible. And also, there should be support for validating requests coming into the server to see if all the data is there, as Jim mentioned, or is something missing, and then depending on, for instance, policy or whatever, the server should then decide, okay, this is an error, or I should allow this. So this is something we need to look into further. And yeah, the client should be able to signal to the server what type of data, or type of media type it prefers. So the client can say, okay, I just want to use JSON, or I should just want to use XML. Any questions on this? Okay.
Nobody in the queue.
Going.
Oh, hold on. We have Pavel. Were you thinking about stepping forward?
This is just a short mention because, of course, the YAML of or XML is not kind of corresponded in the charter, but this can be a future extension. I will cover for it in the architecture.
Yeah, sure. So it's not mentioned anywhere in the charter, but so I'm not sure if the charter mentions like multiple data formats, or does it say specifically only JSON? I'm not clear about it.
It says, I was going to point this out, the charter says JSON.
JSON,
So
okay.
I would
So-
be wary about wandering too far into different data formats.
Yeah. So, and as I mentioned before, these are not final requirements, so we could also skip this if we say, okay, this is not appropriate.
We have James also in the queue with a question.
Yeah, as far as the data formats, it would be important, I believe, to consider the packet protocol separate from the REST transport layer. I think so, we'll get into the architecture later on, but if you're focused on JSON, then you could support, it does that you need to define it, the ability to have different packet protocols right on top of the REST transport. Thanks.
Thank you.
Next point, discoverability.
Hold on, Martin.
Sorry.
Q Missel?
Yes. Hello, Q Mazel. Sorry, I was a bit slow adding myself to the queue. On data formats, we should probably ideally have one, because then otherwise we could end up in an annoying situation where my client has implemented 2 of the data formats, a server has implemented 2 other data formats, and they can't talk to each other. That's kind of not the point of a standard.
No, true. You would need both the client and the server to agree on the same format, and if there is no match, then that's an issue. Yes, I agree. So we need to, as most of these points, we need to discuss. Okay, is this something we would like? And as Andy said, this isn't even, and Paul said, this isn't even mentioned in the charter. So could very likely be that we just say, okay, it's just going to be JSON.
That's my preferred option.
Good point. Thank you. Powell?
So as a reaction, so we actually considered keeping this possibility open, basically to, let's say, as a learning from the EPP situation, where we found that we cannot go away from XML because it's hard written in the standard that it has to be XML. So we don't know what will be the new kit in, let's say, in 10 years. And we want to keep the possibility open to have a different format if we need it ever.
Okay. Oh.
Jim Reed, I just want to pick up on what Pavel said. I think it's important to have the flexibility to accommodate new data formats as and when they arise. But I think what we have to put into our requirements documents, there will at least be one data format which is mandatory to support.
Yes, very good. I think here it says that there is a default data format, and that should be JSON. Okay, on to discoverability. How do clients discover where a RDAP server, RPP server is located? This is something that could be done using a mechanism as the RDAP uses, for instance, using like a bootstrap document managed by IANA, or it could be as simple as having a record in your DNS zone for your TLD, pointing to the domain name for the RPP service. That's for discovering the actual location of the service itself. And then when you know this service location, then you probably want to find out, okay, what does this service support? So there could also be discovery mechanisms for service functionality discovery. That could be like a discovery document in the well-known subdirectory on the server. Could also be something like HOS, which allows you to decouple the client and the server more and discover the URLs linked to all the functionality. And in the case that we end up in a situation where RPP does not support everything that EPP does, if that's going to be a case, then this should also be discoverable by the client. So if you come out with this, that RPP allows for certain functionality to be there or not to be there, then the client should be able to figure this out itself. And also more or less similar to what's in EPP in the hello doc response, the list of extensions supported by RPP should also be discoverable. Could also be in kind of a discovery document in the well-known directory or through some other means. Any questions on this?
Nobody in the queue. You have not 20 minutes.
Still 20 minutes? 20 minutes in total. You did it early. So.
Oh, okay.
10.
No hurry.
Because
Okay.
we skipped the part of Kevin, so you have 10 minutes. Oh, Jim?
Yeah, Jim Reed yet again. I'm a little bit concerned about what you just, could you please go back to the previous slide, Martin? I'm a little bit concerned about the idea of putting lots of hooks in here for discovery mechanisms. I think that's going to overly complicate the protocol. And to my mind, some of the things we're talking about for these discovery mechanisms are perhaps more appropriate for the contract that goes in place between the registry and the registrar. And I think that would be the enforcement mechanism for defining what are the potential mechanisms that could be used. I think we should try to keep that discovery stuff out of the protocol if we possibly can. If you look at the hassles we're having in DNS and discussions around DELIC and all the rest of it, discovery stuff gets very complicated very quickly, and I think we could end up boiling the ocean. So I would suggest we try and avoid that if we possibly can.
Yeah, I sort of agree. I think that if there's not a clear use case for why we should include this, then we should not add it just because we can.
Yeah, I agree. I think the problem is we're a bunch of engineers and we like to tinker with stuff. So the temptation will be there because the flexibility could be built into this. We could spend forever just playing with it, because, as you say, because we can.
Yeah, I agree. Some of the things that, for instance, like the HOS, it's hard for me to pronounce. What is it? HOS is like commonly used. No, it's not. It's used for RESTful APIs, and it doesn't have to be overly complicated. But on the other hand, if we don't need it, then yeah, I agree with you. Then we should not add it, at least not at first, and maybe make provisions that it can be added later on if you like to.
Yeah, I mean, I think something you try and bear in mind, maybe this needs to be put into the requirements document thing that you're working on the wikis. Don't add stuff unless there's an absolute compelling reason to add it and there's a valid justifiable use case for it. If we don't have these things, if you just think, oh, it's just nice to have, well, I think we should just chop it off and say, well, we'll worry about that if and when the case comes, when the use case arrives for it. Until then, no, keep it out this core protocol development. That's my stake on it anyway.
Yeah, this could be part of the requirement design process. So we have come up with a set of rules on how to evaluate requirements, and I think this is an important one. Okay, do we actually need this? And because we can add all these nice things, but they will just generate more code and potentially more vulnerabilities later on in your deployment. So yeah, I totally agree with you on this.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Jim. Kevin, good to have you here. Sound check.
Good to be here. Hello, everyone. So I just wanted to, on the conversation that just now between Jim and Martin, I think there's worth differentiating between discoverability of what RPP server services what TLD, and learning the URLs of related resources. So that's what HEATOAS, or however you pronounce it, really means, is that when you're looking at or retrieving a representation of a resource from a RESTful service, related objects, which might be in the case of a domain name be like its name servers or contact objects or whatever, the response actually contains links that can be followed, and that's, I think, a separate question from how do you work out which RPP server to go to register a domain name.
Yeah, you're right. I didn't make it really clear, but on this slide, there are two types of discoverability. One, as you mentioned, for the service location, for the server itself, and one for the functionality on the server, as you described.
Paul? Oh, sorry. Yeah, Paul?
Yeah. So what I don't like about this line is that actually it puts these two elements, so service discovery and whatever in the same sentence, because on the left hand side, I think some level of discoverability we will need anyway, to at least to figure out what extensions are supported and alike, and the concepts of hypermedia and to what extent you want to apply it, it really has to be apply it very cautiously, just not to over-engineer it.
Yeah, so good point. So as I mentioned before, these slides just are mentioned to get people thinking about this, and then we need discussions on, okay, what do we actually need, and then try to write this down as actual requirements. And this is all good input. No more comments, or?
Well, we have Kevin in the queue, but I'm not sure if he forgot to go out of the queue. So, yeah, he's out.
Okay. Next up, kind of a biggie, EPP compatibility. Yeah, we should provide functional equivalents for EPP functions and objects such as the domains, the hosts, and the context. We should have mappings between the structures in RPP and EPP. And we support some, all, none of the EPP extensions. So this is related to Jim's work and the Tiger team with the analysis of the EPP extension. So we need to figure out, okay, how much of the EPP extensions can we, for instance, incorporate in RPP as a part of the protocol itself, and how many of those extensions should be able to function in RPP, or at least be compatible with RPP. And maybe some extensions are too difficult to use together with RPP, depending on choices you make. So we have to really have some good idea about how these different extensions in RPP look and how they function and what they require. So this is why the Tiger team output is very important. And maybe we should also reconsider some of the design decisions that were made for EPP a long time ago. They were probably very good decisions at the time, but we're 20 years on now, so maybe, and the world has changed, so maybe we could revisit some of the decisions that people think need to maybe change, so we could incorporate that as well in RPP. Any questions on these potential requirements?
Jim?
Yeah, I believe the most important aspect is the data model itself. And when we're designing RPP, to be very careful associated with trying to get creative and trying to fix what some may perceive as an issue with some of the EPP extensions that currently exist. So if we follow what is good about EPP, where everything is an extension, including the objects, a domain, a host, contact, that provide concrete examples of extensions themselves, and attempt to match the functionality in EPP and focus on the core aspects of the protocol. The additional extensions could be done by regex in the end if it was rechartered to support RPP extensions, instead of having the RPP working group attempt to work on everything. So, thank you.
Yeah, I agree that the extensions in EPP and the compatibility with RPP, and let's say it the other way around, that when we have something like RPP and the extensions for RPP and EPP might end up being the same, or that we have one set of extensions that work for both, and then RPP could be folded into the EPP working group, or yeah, we have to look into that, see what's practical.
Hello, Christian Zim from Denic. What is in my mind is to pick up the work from Jim from the Tiger team. So what he mentioned is that they experience various extensions of different kinds. So there are data extensions, there are process extensions, and so on. And maybe there are solutions not the same for different types of extensions in RPP. So I would recommend considering that.
Hi, Ori Steele. On the question of EPP extensions, I want to be very clear. The RPP working group is not chartered to create EPP extensions. If you want to extend EPP, you could take that work to registrations extensions. There's obviously a lot of EPP compatibility and considerations, that are relevant here, and I think that's a great discussion. But these are two separate working groups, and there is no mandatory bidirectional translation or compatibility that has to be maintained. And I would caution you to sort of be careful as you consider how much direct translation work you want to do versus how much solutioning for the use case that you're actually designing around. Just be careful about how you do that. And if there is a need to sort of coordinate or create something inspired by the work that's happening in this group, I think that's a great topic of discussion for the registrations extensions group, and encourage you to take that work there.
Yeah, thank you. I totally agree. I was just thinking about, like, if we end up in a situation where you have RPP that can transparently support EPP extensions, so you might be easier then to go to regex and register a new or create a new extension there that can automatically then also be used by RPP if that compatibility layer is there in RPP. So you only have to have one extension and then you can use it in both protocols. But if there's like if that compatibility is not automatic, then any RPP extensions might have to be done in the RPP working group, and a comparable EPP extension would have to be done in the EPP working group, or not if there's no need for an EPP extension and only RPP extension is fine. So
Martin,
that's all. Yeah, we are still starting this working group, so we have to figure out a lot of things out how to go forward from here.
You have -3 minutes.
Ooh. Plenty of time, you said. How many slides have we? Oh, okay, I'll go quickly. So maybe I'll skip one or two. So let me know when
Yeah, just go ahead, Jeff. Yeah. 4 slides.
Okay. Okay. About security, this is for publicly facing APIs. Security is obviously one of the most important things. It would be nice if we have support for modern authentication mechanisms and standards such as OAuth and OpenID Connect. Also, maybe look into digital identities. A lot of European countries have national digital identity schemes for identifying citizens, and some countries also make it mandatory that your customers need to be identified. So this could be useful for certain use cases. And I think we also mentioned, I think Paul maybe mentioned already, like maybe the need for a granular authorization model to allow different types of users to do different types of things in the RPP system. And one big issue, not big issue, it's one of the bigger issues around security, and especially in EPP, is like the handling of the transfer token, which is at worst a plain text token somewhere in the database that never changes and gets handed around and is required for transferring a domain name between registrars. In RPP, we could maybe leverage like more modern authentication schemes, such as OAuth, for making this transfer not only more secure, but also maybe easier for registrants. And this might also enable other parties to also maybe get better access to data in registries, such as the DNS providers that host domain names for their clients, but are unable to submit DNSSEC material, the keys to the registry for the inclusion in their name zones, DNS zones. Yes, questions?
So Jim Galvin again, real quick. I've seen the transfer stuff on here a few times, and I just want to say out loud, there is a new transfer model coming for GTLDs in ICANN, which doesn't use the auth code. It has a whole different system, and you should pay attention to that. There's also a new document that will be discussed in regex tomorrow about using PKI-based mechanisms for the token for transfers. So just drop those plugs here. You'll want to consider those as you move forward in looking at transfers in RPP. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I knew about like the work in regex. I'm not up to date with what's going on with ICANN, but if you have like a link for me for that, then I would appreciate that.
Jim?
Actually, I'm very interested in what Jim has to say about the auth info change. But yeah, I just wanted to bring up that we should be very careful related to trying to get creative associated with things like auth code, which would be if RPP did not support the auth code, then it would make it very difficult to have interoperability between the two. So once we branch off into a different area and get creative, it will cause an issue in the data model. So thanks.
Yeah, true. So having support for something like OAuth doesn't mean you don't support the transfer token. So you could maybe allow for both as maybe a mechanism to maybe more easily transform from the older token to the newer OAuth format. Okay. Yes, can you make it quick? Extensibility, well, we should be able to extend just as EPP, almost everything is extensible, and I think that's a very nice approach. RPP, it should be easy to add new features, new resources, new data structures, and make this as easy as possible. I'll skip this one.
By the way, we are closing the queue. If you have any questions, put them in the chat so Martin can then follow up on them.
Yeah, and scalability things, okay. Make it possible to load balance on requests versus and not on sessions. Look at caching. And also for those cases where a request message may not be needed, for instance, for a check or an info command for an object. In EPP, you would always need a request XML message for this. And in something like RPP, just having a domain name, or sorry, a URL and using a HTTP method should be enough and doesn't require an actual payload. So this could also help us in scalability and performance, especially because those are the most used commands in EPP. And a little bit about the design process. Well, we should definitely learn from all the hard work that has been done in EPP and RDEP over the years. There's a lot of knowledge there on how to design protocol. And we should not forget on trying to use most of the things that have been learned there. And also, we should try to move fast, but without breaking things. I know it's usually said move fast and break things, but I don't like to break things, but I do like to move fast. And also try to keep the process as lightweight as possible. For instance, these requirements, they might end up in an informational RFC, but during the design of the protocol itself, I would like to keep them in a more lightweight form, maybe in GitHub or the wiki, and then be able to easily modify the requirements if everybody agrees, of course. And Yeah, and the same for developing the documents. I'd like to keep that as agile as possible. And yeah, so this most, yeah, we're done.
Okay. Wow.
Told you it was a long list, sorry.
Never realized that this would be such a topic of discussion, but I could have guessed it, I guess. Pavel, you're next. Thank you, Martin. Thank you very much. Let's see. Hold on 1 second.
Wait.
Yes, the floor is yours.
Can I click? Yes. Yes, so I think this was a very good introduction about say moving fast, but because you may ask yourself why we are talking about architecture already when we barely talk about requirements. Yeah, but I think looking at the potential architecture right now would allow us to move faster. Also, thinking about requirements and looking what architecture we can be following, and then looking at the requirements. And I think this is an iterative process. So basically, there's a very early draft, putting some ideas, let's say, on paper. So basically, we have material to discuss on. I loaded it into data tracker, but let's say the main source is on GitHub. And basically, I wanted to convey here a few basic concepts which I think we should follow in the architecture space. So first of all, RPP should be following the resource-oriented architecture, which is a bit of in contrast to RPC-oriented architecture, which EPP was following. So basically, all manageable entities would be resources. They would have representation which will be coming over the wire. So it would be JSON in the say default form, but it can be kind of anything. And basically, this is negotiated over HTTP standard content negotiation. Each resource is identified by unique URL, and basically we try to use the uniform HTTP interface as much as physically possible. Sometimes there are some design choices to do, but in most cases this is possible, and it makes the implementation of both sides much more straightforward, because nobody has to think twice what this operation means if it is a standard interface. The other 2 points are more referred to the requirements part, less about resource oriented, but each request to resource is treated independently from the previous request, and there is no state of the client kept on the server. So basically, it's stateless. And what I put in the document is a kind of structured layer of which kind of functions which each layer would take in RPP. So there is the HTTP transport. As far as this term is probably false, and some people can be confused, but I see everything which we transport over HTTP layer and all the functions that we realize over HTTP. Then the data presentation itself, including data structure, and then the resource definition underneath. And I will go into details right now. So I think the biggest advantage of RPP in the end can be to utilize as much as from HTTP as possible, and basically not to reinvent what is already solved somewhere else. And HTTP solves a lot of problems. And this, I think, which makes RESTful APIs so successful. So basically, the authentication authorization can be done on this layer. The resource addressing, as I mentioned, mapping of the basic operations. The additional element, which I think RPP should define as a kind of template is the mapping of the operations which don't fit the standard interface, basically how to do it in the uniform way. So basically it's done the same. When HTTP has certain space of error codes or status codes, and basically it has to be put in the relation to RPP specific code. So I don't think these layers are completely independent. So if the resource is not existing, I would expect to have the same HTTP code for an existing resource and maybe some RPP specific code for more details, let's say on the provisioning level, but basically that they should be interrelated, and the RPP should define this. Then how we trace transactions and how we deal with idempotency. I think HTTP covers parts of it, but parts of it would have to be added. Content negotiation, I've mentioned language negotiation. This HTTP also solved this problem to some extent. Service discovery mechanism and the definition of potential special resources if we need them. Then going down the data representation layer, this actually how let's say the resource is represented when going let's say in and going out. So I think the one of the let's say important concepts in the RESTful design is that the client may receive a representation from the server, potentially modify it and send it back in the same form. So basically, let's say when receiving resource representation and sending it back from the client to server, it can be defined by the same model. But in the general sense, it's a let's say first the data structure. So it's a kind of a tree of nested properties, lists and sub-objects. So it can be put in and defined in an abstract way. And in the second step, it can be put in some representation. So whether it's JSON, XML, YAML, whatever, if it can represent this kind of basic abstract structure of properties, it doesn't matter actually. And all together, you have to pack it into media type definition, which will define additional bits of detailed information. And then there's this third element underneath, which I think it's useful. So the resource definition layer, which will basically define first the object types in more abstract way. So not really referring to a fields in a JSON or whatever other representation, but first thinking, okay, if I have a domain name object, what kind of properties it has, and to name them and to specify them. Yeah, so basically, after done that, the mapping can be a second step, but I will go to it in the other slides. On this layer, also the extensibility mechanisms can be defined and the operations that can be performed. An interesting aspect of this can be to have a description of the data model and the machine processable format by some schema language or even using IANA registries. I don't want to decide on this right now. But basically, this would allow also clients to explore it interactively and adjust to the server. This has a lot to do with the discovery part, but it doesn't have to be necessity. Yeah. So this is why I think that there is a need for data as abstraction. So there's a kind of lesson learned from RDAP space. We have, for example, the reverse search specification and the redacted fields, which actually need to refer to a certain field in the representation. But actually, they do it in different way, and they are doing they are using two different IANA registries. So FN in the search is the same as registrant name on the redacted fields. Handle is the same as registrant ID, and email is the same as registrant email. So, but there is no place which will say that they are the same thing. So basically, first level will be to define the data elements, which some basic, let's say, semantics and let's say, syntax behind it. So this is not any format. This just I folded up for the slide, but I hope this is understandable. And then to define the resources, just saying, okay, which data elements are in this resource, and only then going to mapping them to RPP. So saying that, okay, these elements are going in these places in the JSON representation, and this the definition for now, but this will allow us also to define a mapping also to other formats. So this can be, for example, a mapping to EPP if you wish, or to whatever else format you need. Because there are some, oops. Oh, this slide were swapped, sorry.
Well, we are limited in time, so please, if you keep an eye on the clock.
I'm almost finished. So there were also asks for JS card as possible representation of verifiable credentials as or additional identities, as Martin mentioned. So basically, in this format, you have no influence where the fields are, but you can reference to them. So basically, this mapping layer can be useful in this case. Yeah, and the operations that I mentioned, that these are loosely related to the representation. Sometimes we are referring to them, like sorting, filtering is sometimes needs to refer to representations. This is the slide. Okay, so some questions to the mic. So is this document a right starting point for RPP, or there are any, let's say, things that you don't like and it is going in a completely wrong direction? The second part is basically where to put this work, whether we should work on this as an ID or to work it on Wiki, on the GitHub. So this is more procedural work, because I think there's a bit of disconnect in the charter, because it says core architecture as a deliverable, as standard document. So I think the RPP document in the end, but this document can be a starting point for this, but it may be also a different document that we will call core architecture deliverable in the end. Yeah, answer the question, if this is the right starting point, should we adapt it now or should we adapt it after some refinement? I'm open to feedback on this. Talking about this, I thought what kind of documents we may need in RPP in general. So basically, core architecture and protocol design is obvious, but I think authorization authentication can be split out to a separate document. The JSON representation and media type should be additional deliverable, and then we may have documents for domain contacts and hosts with appropriate mapping documents. So this may be 2 documents for each object type. Service discovery may be even a separate document. So if you count all of this, it tells me like 10 IDs in total, but this my view on this, but I'm eager to hear feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I'm unlocking the queue only for JustDip. We have time for one question, JustDip.
Hi, Pavel. I just wanted to encourage this work. Though the RARs are right now not involved, I have actually read this doc, and I just want to compliment how well it's structured. And so I strongly encourage us to continue this, because this helps us essentially not straitjacket, but figure out the constraints of what we are doing here. Thank you. Thank you for this work.
Thank you. All right, Kevin, are you still there?
Yes, I am. Yeah. Hello.
I noticed you uploaded some updated slides. Can you present them yourself, or do you want me to put them forward?
Let me. I need slide control to be able to do it myself.
Can you try?
Yep. Okay. So this is obviously something that was missed at the beginning of this meeting, but I actually think having had the conversations that we've had that actually it's kind of good that we're talking about it now. So we obviously, as a working group, have to decide on what our deliverables are going to be, and Pavel's already talked a little bit about what those could look like, and also the timeframes by which we want to deliver them. So what I've got on the slide here on screen is a straw man for discussion, and obviously it's down to the working group to decide whether these milestones deliverables are appropriate and whether the milestones are achievable. So I'm basically bringing them here to discussion by the rest of the working group. The first item would be the decision on requirements. Now, this may be a living document that may change over the course of the working group's life, but it is required that it be a consensus document, that there be working group consensus on it. It doesn't have to be published as an RFC, but maybe it can be memorialized as an RFC once the working group is done. And I've suggested that 6 months from now might be an achievable deadline for settling on at least the requirements that we would then take forward as we go through the developing of the rest of the specifications. And then, assuming that the core architecture would itself be an RFC, we have a milestone of August 2026, which was, I think, about 18 months out from when I drafted this. And then 6 months on from that, the second set of documents, which would be the specifications for provisioning of domain names. Now, what Pavel has just presented as outlined a kind of fairly expansive set of documents, and it may be that that these need revision. But again, this is going to be something that the working group needs to decide whether what Pavel has outlined really is achievable, and whether these milestones make sense. So what I'd really like to do is get input from people in the room on whether they think this is something we can work towards, because I at this point don't know myself. James Gould.
Yeah, I was thinking for the requirements to target November and IETF 124. I honestly believe that there's going to be some consensus issues on the requirements that we're going to need to work through. So we may need more time than anticipated. That's all.
Martin?
It's Martin, SIDN. I'm not quite sure about the core architecture and the rest of the documents and their timelines, because I think they're very closely related, all of them. So we probably have to work on all of them simultaneously to make sure that everything is working correctly together. So yeah, I'm just not sure about how we're gonna, if we're going to be able to meet this timeline, but that's just me, I guess.
Okay. I mean, if we need to add more time in, then we need to add more time in. And these are not deadlines by which, if we don't finish, then everything goes, gets thrown away, and we don't achieve anything. One thing I would caution, though, is that as a working group, we need to be able to measure progress. And if we don't want to go from 0 to 100%. We want to be able to measure our progress as we go. And so if it's fine if we're going to be working on all of these documents all at once, but maybe we need to think about what are the intermediate stages where we can say, look, we have actually made some progress, and we are, have a realistic prospect of completing what we want to do in a measurable and a realistic time frame. So that may be that we move forward with some things first and then worry about other things later. It might be that we we say we're going to get to working group consensus on something, but then not proceed to RFC publication because we think we might need to change it because other things come along that mean we need to reconsider those things, and then we go through the consensus process again. But this is something I want to outline, is that as a working group, I think we need to have, we can't go from have no milestones and then say 2 years from now we'll be done. I think we should try and kind of set ourselves targets of having something that we want to achieve within say 6, 9, 12, 18 months, because I think otherwise there's a risk that we'll just drift. Jim, although actually, sorry, Martin is still in the queue. Is that?
Yeah, bauqualität. I think these milestones are ambitious, but I think we should keep them because it should make right pace for this working group. And as you said, if we figure out that some things get complex on the way, then we will manage from this.
Yeah. Jim Reid. Gavin, I think these proposed timelines you've got there look reasonable enough to me. They might be a little bit on the ambitious side, but I think they're eminently achievable if there's a good sense and people are prepared to actually work on the protocol stuff that needs to be done. So I think these are a good starting point. And as you said, they're not fixed in stone. So if something pops up that means we have to take a little bit longer, then fine, that's okay. And I think we should also try to follow the model that's been used in the DELEG working group, where the decision was taken there early on, and this is a new working group that's been started, is that work on the actual protocol stuff was parked for a little while until the requirements were kind of agreed by consensus in the working group. And I think this should be the model we followed here, that until we've got consensus on the requirements, it seems a bit premature to start discussing details of the core architecture or the specifications and the mapping. I think we have to get those requirements nailed down first, and that should be the first priority for the working group, at least in my opinion. Cheers.
Rick Wilhelm, +1 to what Jim said right at the end about the priority on the requirements over the architecture. The thing, I also think that the September sounds a bit tight, other than the working group might consider an interim or two in the middle between both now and Madrid and then after Madrid to help bump the tempo. A couple of interims would help us realize that there's actually a lot of time between now and September if we make good use of it. Thank you.
Martin?
Martin, SIDN. I just want to respond to Jim's comment about first having the requirements locked down before we start working on architecture. I understand that. But on the other hand, I don't want to exclude working on architecture stuff while the requirements are still not fixed, because working on and thinking about architecture will no doubt lead to insights and will lead to potentially new and changed requirements. So as I mentioned before, that I like a more agile approach, and having the requirements locked down first is more, feels to me more like the old waterfall approach. Okay, first we're gonna have to have everything figured out and then we start the actual work. I do feel that we need to have some set of requirements figured out before we start working, but I don't think we need to have everything figured out already.
Okay, thank you, Martin. So that concludes this section of the agenda. We do have, do we have some time? I think we have 5 minutes. Martin, did you want to talk briefly about the RPP core draft?
Shall I put up the slide, Kevin?
Yeah, please go ahead.
1 second. Yes.
Yeah, well, after the discussion of just a minute ago about being premature with documents and stuff before we have requirements, this is very, very, very premature probably, but gonna go with it anyway. While this work was still floating around in the regex working group, we worked on a document for what was then called RESTful EPP, which contained like foundational work for which will eventually become RPP. And there was a document there which described forms of an API. And I've updated this document to a new version, renamed it, removed the EPP dependencies, and removed some of the commands, removed the XML. So it's kind of like a bare bones API, possible API document that could potentially be a starting point for working on an RPP API. So I kind of have the question at this moment. So what to do with this document? Could it be possibly a candidate for adoption at some point? Do we continue working on this and maybe at the next meeting see if we can adopt this? Or yeah, those are questions I have. So I would really like feedback on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Any comments on Martin's questions? No one in the queue? Okay. Marco, do we have 90 seconds to discuss the other item from the time permitting agenda?
I don't think we can make that, Kevin. No.
No.
Definitely not.
Okay. I don't think Pavel can talk that fast. Okay. So I guess then that means that we're coming to the close of the meeting. So as the kind of co-chair who was unable to join until half an hour into the start of the meeting, let me firstly apologize for that, but also thank Marco, my co-chair, for taking on the task of running the meeting without me, and also thank Andy for being his wingman as well. That's much appreciated. Thank you everyone who participated and presented. That's much appreciated. Thank you to note takers. I'm gonna guess that it was Rick, but I may be mistaken. And thank you everyone for your participation, and we'll be see you on the mailing list. We'll be working on this soon. Thank you everyone.
Thank you everyone. Thanks. Now you want me to close it? Okay.
Good job.